All right, if you don't know already, my name is Andrew Mulcahy, and I work for the New Zealand office of Creation Ministries International. This morning, I want to look at the creation account, which is contained in Genesis. And specifically, can it be relied upon as Christians as being truth? Or is it, as atheists constantly tell us, that it's just a warm, fuzzy fairy tale? As I mentioned, CMI, we have offices in... Oh, okay, we have it? Cool, there we go. Let me see if my... More technological issues. I'll try again. Oh, there we go. Okay, cool. CMI. Creation Ministries International. So, foundational truth or fictional folly? That's what I want to look at this morning. This is not going well. Here we go. So we have offices in seven offices on 5 continents. We were founded over 40 years ago. We speak at over 1,000 churches worldwide every year. Now that was pre-pandemic. Globally, we employ more PhD scientists than any other Christian organisation in the world. However, that's not really what we're about. We're not just about the science. It's actually about helping you share your Christian faith with those around you. So let me ask you this question. How many have been out witnessing, sharing your faith, and being challenged with questions such as this? Did God really create everything in 6 days? Hasn't science proven that evolution is true, along with its millions of years? And what about ape men? The Bible never mentions dinosaurs. Doesn't carbon dating prove the world is old? Where did all the races come from? Why does a loving God allow death and suffering? Hands up if you've been asked questions like that. Now leave them there. I want everyone to look around the room. See, it's very common, isn't it? That people push back using science to try to prove that the Bible is wrong. And that's why Creation Ministries International exists, to answer questions that help equip you with answers, so that you can then go out and witness the truth of the gospel to others, so that then they too can come to Christ, join the family. So our primary focus for over the past 40 years has been to work and partner with churches. Our speakers, they share the message of creation, they explain its relevance to the gospel message, and then we link people to the wonderful, life-changing resources that are available. Now, you will have seen as you walked in that there are some resources on the book tables, and Pastor Paul mentioned them. So let me just address the elephant in the room. I am not here to sell you books. In fact, that's not how our ministry operates. We are actually donor-funded. And it's like wonderful people like you that just continue to donate to us so that we can do the work of presenting, linking, and feeding. So my job this morning is to point you to the information and the resources so that you can equip yourselves and your family, and secondly, so that you can fulfill the Great Commission to reach others through evangelism with that sort of information. One of the resources that you can find the answers to a lot of these questions is on our website. And our website address, in case you haven't heard it, because it's a very difficult one to remember, and just so you know, if you say something aloud, you're more likely to remember it. So I want you to repeat this after me. Creation.com. Very good. And on there, you will find over 15,000 articles written by scientists and professionals over the last 44 years. So have you ever watched one of those nature documentaries on the TV and they go, wow, look at this, we've found these new fossils in Africa, and it proves that humans evolved from apes millions of years ago. Or perhaps that evidence has been found that life on Earth was actually seeded from outer space. Aliens, ladies and gentlemen. Now, where do you go if you want to find a bit more information about that? It's not like you could go to Pastor Paul, is it? He's not a scientist, he's a pastor. So that's what our organisation does. That's where we can help, because within a few days of breaking news, we'll have an article on our website that you can read, digest, and then pass on to all and sundry. So once again, our website is brilliant. You're fast learners. Now, as well as the website, we also have a free email newsletter called InfoBites. It's a great resource right at your fingertips that you can use to help answer the questions that others have. We write an article, put a paragraph in our email news, and then we send it out to you. And a lot of you already signed up. And the brilliant thing is that in this digital age, you can just pass it on to all and sundry. That's all you have to do. Because here's the thing, it's not our job to save people. I don't know whether you realize that, but it's a huge relief for me to know that I am just called to be a faithful witness. Because it's God that does the saving, ladies and gentlemen. But we can all share information. And the questions like the ones I mentioned earlier, they're often intellectual stumbling blocks to people believing in the truth of the Bible. And we all know that we hear, particularly our youth, evolution 24/7. And if that's the case, where are they going to hear a biblical response? Is it going to be when they go to school? No. Is it going to be when they turn on their TV? No. Well, what about when they go to university? Are they going to hear the biblical response then? No? Well, please understand that the heart of our ministry is to give you a defense for the faith that you can share with your children, your grandchildren, your neighbors, your co-workers, your friends and loved ones, with the ultimate goal of allowing God to touch their hearts. And so my team of helpers are going to come around, they're going to pass around some clipboards with sign-up sheets so that you can fill them out for our free email. We just need your name, your phone number, your postcode, and your email address. It's that simple. And if you just pass them along the row so that everybody has the opportunity, and then my helpers will just get them back off you at the end. And while they're doing that, I'll carry on with the talk. We've talked about flooding this morning, but there's also another tragedy that's happening in New Zealand right now. And that's that we have an awful lot of beaches around the country. And every summer, without fail, the news are full of stories about people that have gotten into trouble and had to be rescued. And this summer is no exception. In fact, it's been described as one of the worst on record for drownings and has been called a national disaster. And lifeguards have been busier than ever, rescuing people. It's a tragic situation, and I really grieve for every family that's had to go through that, that's had to lose loved ones in that way. And then you look at it on the news, and typically there are interviews with the bystanders and who have called the emergency services or called for help. And they watch as the lifeguards swim out into the pounding waves, the rips, the currents, the really rough conditions, and they bring these people or persons back to the safety of shore. And the fact is that our lifeguards on beaches, particularly this summer, regularly save people. So why do the lifeguards do it while the other people just stand on the beach and watch? Why do they do it? They're trained, they're prepared, they're equipped. They know how to handle the conditions. But here's the thing, there's a far, far bigger tragedy happening all around us all the time. And that is that people are spiritually drowning. So many are in deep water, being pounded by waves of doubt, full of questions like, is there really a God? Does he love me? Or how about this one? Is the Bible true? And am I right that in our culture, that particular question has been answered with a resounding no? The reason is because most people believe in evolution, and it's accompanying millions of years. And they believe that that is proven scientific fact. They believe that that's true, then the Bible can't be true. And in fact, I think it's more like a tsunami, that it's pulling people away from the solid rock of God's word that we're called to trust and have faith in. My question for all of us here today to think carefully about, are you willing to equip and train yourself with the answers to the tough questions so that you can be the one that dives in and rescues the perishing, while others perhaps stand by and watch? 1 Peter 3:15 says, I'm just at the edge of the range. There we go. 1 Peter 3:15 says we are to always be ready to give a defense to everyone who asks for a reason for the hope that is in you. Now, does that sound like a suggestion or a command? It's a command. And it's a command for every believer. And by the way, the word defense comes from the Greek word that is apologia. And that's the ancient Greek legal term that was used in courts of law in order to describe what a lawyer might do in defending a client. So what about you? Are you always prepared with a defense for your faith in the Bible, especially in the area around the creation and evolution debate? Because a lot of people think that the creation and evolution debate is really just a side issue, that there's more important things we should focus on. But the truth is, it is foundational to the gospel as well as to everything else in the Bible. So we're going to talk a little bit about science today. And did you know that there are statements in the Bible that have scientific implications? In the very first chapter of Genesis, chapter 1, there's a phrase that's repeated 10 times. It says that God created plants and animals to reproduce according to its kind. There. Eventually. And that means that apple seeds grow into apple trees. Dogs give birth to dogs. Whales give birth to whales, etc. So what we're talking about here is the genetic information that God created in the original kinds have been passed down through the generations. But here's the thing, most people have been told a completely different story. Most people are told that over millions and millions and millions of years, through the process of chemical evolution, natural selection and random mutation, a blob of goo turns into an animal, which then passes on its genetic information to future generations, and it slowly changes from one creature into a completely different kind of creature. or to put simply, goo to you via the zoo. And that's why we need to have a reasoned and rational and logical defense for our faith. Because if we don't have that defense, do you know what's going to happen? Who's heard of Barna research? Yeah, a few of us. Recent studies show that almost 2/3 of US youth raised in Christian homes are leaving the faith. And it's getting worse. But of course, we're talking about somebody else's children, somebody else's grandchildren, not yours, right? But here's the thing, New Zealand is no different. And in fact, every Western country as well, ladies and gentlemen, has the same similar statistics. So here's another question for you. What percentage would be acceptable to you and your family? To look a little deeper at it, CMI went on to a college campus in the States, and they made a short documentary called Fallout. And basically what they did is to first locate students that claimed they had regularly attended church in the past. And then they asked them a series of questions. The first question was, do you believe in evolution or creation? And not surprisingly, the majority of students surveyed said they believed in evolution. And of the hundreds of students surveyed, only 5 said that they still believed in biblical creation. Then they were asked if they'd been given any scientific evidence that supported the historical account of the Bible. And every student who was raised in a Christian home but now believed in evolution, every single one said they'd never been shown any information. And of the 5 that still believed in biblical creation, every one of them said they had been shown information. And then the last question, do you still attend church? And all those who now believed in evolution, all but one of those who said they no longer believed, no longer attended church. All but one. And of the 5 that still believed, they all still attended church faithfully. So I hope you can see why we all need to be prepared with a defense for our faith. And again, that's why Creation Ministry International employs more PhD scientists than any Christian ministry we're aware of. It's to give the easy-to-understand answers to the challenging questions that we as Christians face when we're sharing our faith, so that we can know that our answers are not only biblically, but scientifically accurate. And you may be thinking, well, sure, but people drop out of church for lots of reasons. And you're right. You know, why people drop out and leave the church is a complicated issue. But I can tell you that one of the major reasons given in surveys time and time and time again is the apparent conflict between evolution and creation. But this issue of creation in the book of Genesis versus evolution is not actually about science. Now here I've depicted the battle like 2 trees. And Jesus spoke a lot about trees and fruit. And we all know that trees are going to produce fruit according to their nature. Now, if you look at the screen, please look at the tree on the left-hand side. That's the one called humanism. So what is humanism? Well, humanism is a belief system that mankind, humans, us, we are the ultimate authority. And in this worldview, you can make up your own beliefs about life. Well, why do people believe that? Well, have a look at the soil. That tree is planted in the belief in evolution. But here's the thing, evolution is nothing more than a concept. That 13.8 billion years ago, there was a big bang out of nothing for no particular reason, and lots of time and random chances produced everything we see, including you and I. And therefore, there is no God, there is no creator to be accountable to. And if people subscribe to that as their belief system, their worldview, what type of fruit do you think they're going to produce? So look at some of the problems here: racism, murder, abortion, non-traditional marriage, euthanasia, gender identity, etc., etc., etc. We could keep going. But I submit to you, they are not the problem. They are the fruit of, or the symptoms, if you like, of an underlying foundational problem, and which is humanism, with its roots in evolution. Now compare that to the tree on the right-hand side, the tree of Christianity. Everything you and I need to know about the Christian faith, the nature of God, our need for salvation, where do we get that information from? The Bible. And the Bible is a history book. I'll just lean further forward. Stand over here. And the Bible is a history book of what God created, what went wrong, and why we need to be saved. And if we consider our church doctrine today, most of this is actually contained in the New Testament. And it's based on the fact that the New Testament writers, every single one of them, believed the creation events described in Genesis. They believed it to be history. And in fact, we have references in the New Testament. 103 references. The authors referred to the book of Genesis. Jesus himself referred to the book of Genesis on 16 occasions. He quoted about a real Adam and Eve, a real global flood. And so you see, if we subscribe to that view, that we believe that God is the creator, we shall produce fruit in accordance with that. We'll believe in the sanctity of life. We'll believe that abortion is wrong, that human beings were made in God's image. And we actually love all our neighbours. But here's the key point. Most people believe that evolution because that's really all they've ever been taught. The youth and universities and schools will be taught evolution as a scientific fact. So think about it. If we know that in advance, respectfully, shouldn't we be doing a little more at home and in the church? Because that anti-God view undermines the very, very first thing that the Bible says. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And if he's not the creator as described in the Bible, where does the truth in Scripture start? Does it start in the New Testament? Well, the New Testament authors always referred back to the Old Testament, as I said. And so our beliefs about where we came from ultimately affect our worldview. Our worldviews are, if you like, a set of glasses or lenses through which all of us, even our children, interpret the world. And our worldviews, as I've said, come from a belief about where we came from. Think about it. If evolution is true, is there any ultimate meaning or purpose to our lives? No. We're just evolved pond scum, an accident of nature. Well, what about what happens to you when you die? Nothing. There's no life after death. But if the Bible's true, God is the creator. You and I were created with meaning and purpose. We were created in his image. And the decisions we make in this life, they're going to affect where we spend eternity. And do you realize that the answers to the questions, why are we here? Where do we go? They're always going to be determined by that number one question. When we get to it, where did I come from? Number one question. And think about it, there's only two answers. It's either creation or it's evolution. So, okay, what are we going to do about the science? Because I hear you say, okay, I believe, but you know, evolution, it's proven science. But is it? Let's have a look at that. Operational. Well, there are two basics about science that you're really going to need to understand. Even the term science can be a little tricky because there are actually two major definitions and that are used, and they switch back and forth between them. On the one hand, we have what's called operational science or experimental science. And remember when you were at school and you did some experiments, you used the scientific method, you develop a hypothesis, you perform an experiment, you make observations, you record data, and then you can repeat it. Because this is the kind of science that's done in the present right before our eyes. And in fact, let's say there's somebody here that really didn't believe in the law of gravity. We could actually do an experiment. We could make observations, we could record the data, and we could repeat it time and time again, right here in the present, and find out if that law really works. And you see, operational science is the kind of science that brings us great discoveries like space travel or all our medical advances that benefit us all. But then there's another type of science, and that's called historical science. And that's what we're talking about when we talk about evolution, or for that matter, anything that actually happened in the past. It's not the same science. Say someone here believed that a fish, over millions and millions of years of natural selection, random mutations, passing on its genetic information to future generations, could one time have offspring that would have the ability to walk onto land. Okay, now, if you believe that to be the case, can you do an experiment? Can you observe it happening? Is it repeatable? No. It's a different kind of science. As it's not operational science. It's historic or forensic science. It's looking at the past. And here's the thing, because all the evidence, all the facts that we have with us exist in the present. We can touch them, we can feel them, we can look at them. When we dig up a fossil, it doesn't come with a label that tells us how old it is. It doesn't say what it ate. It doesn't say how it lived. No. What we have to do is take the evidence that's with us in the present and we paint a picture of what we think happened in the past. Because basically, you see, the evidence does not speak for itself. It has to be interpreted. Okay, now we're going to do a little quiz. Show of hands. Who has the most evidence, evolution or creation? How many people think that evolution has the most evidence? Hands up. How many people think that creation has the most evidence? Hands up. Quite a few. Okay. Let me ask you this. Let me put it a different way. When scientists such as paleontologists are looking at the fossil evidence that's with us in the present, in the various museums or the digs around the world, do the creation scientists and the evolutionary scientists, do they have the same or different evidence to observe in the present? The same. Exactly. So we both have exactly the same evidence. And historic science is a lot like a television show. You know, if you watch CSI or NCIS or those courtroom dramas, where the scientists, they take the evidence from a crime that's committed in the past and they bring these facts and evidence into the courtroom. And that evidence is presented by two opposing lawyers. Same facts, same evidence. And one lawyer is saying, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've seen the facts and evidence in this case, and obviously my client is innocent." And while the other lawyer is saying, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I don't know what he's talking about because the facts clearly show that he is guilty." And this one's saying, "No. Notice he's misinterpreting the facts." And this one's saying, no, I'm not misinterpreting the facts. He is, right? Same facts, same evidence, two completely different and opposing explanations, and it's up to the jury to decide which one makes the most sense. Well, let me tell you that in this case, in the case of creation and evolution debate, most of the people in this world have only heard one side of the story. And if that's the case, when it comes to your family, your children, your grandchildren, your neighbours, your co-workers, maybe your fellow students, who's going to tell them the other side of the story? So let's take a brief look at some of the facts and evidence that make sense of the historical account of the Bible. And I want to start out with one of those icons of evolutionarily millions of years, namely the Grand Canyon. Anyone been to the Grand Canyon? Wonderful place to visit. I love it. And it is. Oh, went past it. Wonderful place to visit. Highly recommend it. But if you were to go to the Grand Canyon, you would of course be told that those layers took millions of years to be laid down, and then millions of years again to be eroded. And indeed, when we look at the process of sedimentation, the laying down of those layers, what we observe in the present is that it is a very slow process, just a small layer of layers each year. So if what happens in the present is what's always happened in the past, then I would grant you it had to have taken millions of years. However, did you know that the evidence is overwhelming that these layers were laid down by water? And where do we find layers like this? Well, anywhere and everywhere, in fact. You could go anywhere in the world, you could start digging, and you're going to find these massive sedimentary layers. And what do we find inside those layers? Dead things, fossils. So let me ask you a question. Can you think of an historical event recorded in the Bible that might explain massive sedimentary layers covering the entire planet, laid down by water, and including the evidence of dead things? Does anything come to mind? The flood, the global flood recorded in the Bible. All right, let's move on to a more recent one. 1982, Mount St. Helens eruption. Everyone remember that? Blew its side out. Now let me show you this. More layers. Did these layers take millions of years? Or just thousands of years? Actually, in this case, these layers were laid down in 3 separate events. And that middle layer, that thick band of layers, took just 3 hours. 3 hours. And if you look closely, you can see a tiny, tiny, tiny person down the bottom. So we're not talking about something small. If you were to go to Mount St. Helens, you would see another wonderful sight called Little Grand Canyon. There we go. This is 1/40th the scale of the Grand Canyon. So although it's not as big, it's certainly not small. And if you weren't there to see it form, you might reasonably assume that it took a really long time for that tiny, tiny, tiny river to carve through those layers of rock. But you would actually be wrong. Because you see, this canyon was formed in only one day, and that was on March 19th, 1982, after a flow came through at highway speed, cutting through the soft layers which now, decades later, have been turned to stone. Now, does that remind you of anything that you've seen before? So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you see the evidence supports the historical account of the Bible, as opposed to the evolutionary idea of millions of years that most people have been taught as scientific fact. The canyon formed the river, not the other way around. And then there's the question of fossils. Because everybody knows it takes millions of years to form a fossil. So if you're told that, how do you answer it? Well, if you were to open a textbook or perhaps go to a museum, and you'd often find explanations like this. That Mr. Dinosaur dies, he sinks to the bottom of the ocean, he's slowly buried over millions and millions of years, and then through the process of permineralization, over millions of years, his bones are turned into stone, and then through either erosion or perhaps a geological dig, his bones are dug up, and he's discovered a new fossil. Okay? Makes sense, doesn't it? It sounds reasoned, it sounds logical. But is that what we observe in the real world? Has anyone got fish at home? Tropical fish, goldfish? Okay, no one. Well, if you did have fish, and one of your precious fish were to die, where do you think you would find it? At the bottom? No, at the top. It would be floating. 90% of the time, something that dies in water will float to the top. And if you don't believe me, you could do an experiment. Just go to your neighbour's fish tank, put a drop of cyanide. No, maybe not. No. And then isn't it true? We're sitting at TV and at home watching a wonderful high definition documentary by David Attenborough about sea life. And the cameras zoom down to the ocean bottom and they're panning around. Do we see thousands of creatures just lying there on their back, waiting to be covered in sedimentation and slowly buried over millions of years? Do we see that? No, we don't observe that at all. What happens is that we have Freddy the fish swimming along, and we're going to need lots of mud, lots of sediment, and then he quickly gets buried. And then in those layers, he turns into a fossil. Does that make sense? Does that sound reasonable? Well, let me ask you, do we have evidence that supports this idea that the only way we get a fossil is through rapid fossilization or rapid burial? Let me show you some. These are really cool. Here's a fish eating lunch. There. Now, do you think that's a really, really long lunch? He did not take millions of years to eat his lunch. Or how about this one? This is an ichthyosaur. And I've heard of long labours, but that's ridiculous. It's giving birth. Will I get the right slide? No. It's giving birth, ladies and gentlemen. So, boy, millions of years for a labour? Really? No, this is proof of rapid burial. Well, how about this? This is from New Zealand. Mount Narahoi eruption in 1882. This hut was buried, and 20 years later they dug it up. This hat had been fossilised. You could say it turned from a soft hat into a hard hat. So, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, do you see that the evidence does not support the evolutionary idea of millions of years that most people are taught as scientific fact? It actually supports the historical account of the Bible. Now, I have a question for you. Those examples that I shared with you so far, was that too complex for you? Did you understand those samples of evidence and facts? And more importantly, let me ask you this. Can you picture yourself equipping yourself with those answers so that you too can share? maybe with your neighbors, your co-workers, your fellow students, in a gentle and respectful way, and that they too can become part of the kingdom of God, because that's what our ministry is all about. And okay, you might be sitting there and thinking, well, what's the big deal about millions of years? We should be just focusing on the Bible, talking about biblical morality and stick to the really important doctrines. But do you think that if we could squeeze millions of years into the historical account, do you think it might impact some important doctrines? Let's take a look at that. For example, you know that there are some people in the church, not this church, they say that each day in Genesis represents millions of years. Have you heard that? And I want to let you know that if you take that view, there is a huge, huge theological issue. Because you see that if those millions of years are true, and if they were before Adam, then that means that those sedimentary layers, which is where we get the idea of the millions of years, contain dead things. And that would mean that we would have to put death before the fall, death before sin, death before the curse. Now, does that sound like we might be touching on a pretty important doctrine? So let's take a look at that a little further. You see, in the last verse of Genesis 1, God said for the seventh time that his creation wasn't just good. This time he said it was very good. So what does a very good world look like? Well, there was no sin, there was no death, there was no sorrow, there was no pain. We were created to be with our Creator in perfect harmony. But you all know that we don't live in a world like that anymore, do we? You'll recall the conversation that God had with Adam. And he said that when you eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, you will surely die. For you see, this is when death came into the world. Because we worship a loving God, but we also worship a just God. And the penalty for disobedience, for sin, is death. The good news is that God sent his Son Jesus Christ, who was God in the flesh, who knew no sin, to take our sin upon his body as he was sacrificed on the cross. For those that are in Christ, there will be a new heavens and a new earth. The book of Revelation tells us that. No more sorrow, no more pain, no more death. Is anybody else looking forward to that? And yet, if we say that Adam was preceded by millions and millions of years, then we have a real problem. Because that means that we have death, we have suffering, we have disease before the fall. And if you could summarize the Bible in just a few sentences, you could perhaps do it from Genesis to Revelation in the following way. That in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. It was a perfect paradise. There was no death, no sorrow, no pain. However, Adam disobeyed, and the penalty for sin was death. And every descendant of Adam, which would include everyone in this room, and everyone that ever has and ever will live, inherited that sin nature, and with it, the penalty of death. But because of God's mercy and love for us, he sent his Son to die for us so that in the future there would be a new heavens and a new earth. So when we say that millions of years preceded Adam, we're actually turning the gospel upside down. Because the Bible tells us it's paradise at the beginning and it's paradise at the end. And if you don't believe me, perhaps you'll believe this atheist, Frank Zindler. He was in a debate with a Christian and he said the following. He said, the most devastating thing, though, that biology did to Christianity was the discovery of biological evolution. Now that we know that Adam and Eve were never real people, the central myth of Christianity is destroyed. And then he went on to say this. Oh. If there never was an Adam and Eve, then there never was an original sin. If there never was an original sin, then there was no need of salvation. And if there's no need for salvation, there's no need of a Savior. And I submit that puts Jesus, historical or otherwise, into the ranks of the unemployed. I think evolution is absolutely the death knell of Christianity. And on that point, he is correct, that evolutionary millions of years is not something that's compatible with the gospel. And you might still be thinking, well, come on, millions of years is no big deal. We shouldn't cause division. Why should we limit God? You know, he's such a big, powerful guy. Why should we limit him about how he created? But don't you think it's about time that we believe that God has already told us how he created through his inerrant word? And speaking of a huge division in the church, listen to what this guy has to say. Oh. Martin Luther. I love this. He said, when Moses writes that God created heaven and earth and whatever is in them in 6 days, then let this period continue to be 6 days. But if you cannot understand how this could have been done in 6 days, then please grant the Holy Spirit the honor of being more learned than you are. And there are so many other topics that people have questions about. I want you to remember that we need to be equipped with the answers in all of these areas in order to make an impact for your children, for your grandchildren, and for all those people that you're going to be sharing the gospel with. I hope you can see that we need to be armed. And I've touched on a lot of information, and if you're anything like me, you might remember about 10% of it and then they're gone. Well, good news. I want to present you with a practical opportunity for you to equip everybody in your home, everybody in your family, because it is impossible for me to cover everything in one message. And indeed, I would be remiss if I didn't tell you about the number one resource that we get more testimonies of people coming to know Christ than any other one. And that's Creation Magazine. It's been around for well over 44 years. It goes out to 110 countries. It's 56 pages of beautifully laid out information. It comes out quarterly, and there is not a single advertisement in it. And this is information that you can use in order to equip yourself, or minister to your family, or for those people that you're sharing your life with. I want to let you know that it's very easy. The colourful pages are an excellent evangelical tool that you can use. On top of that, even better news is we have a digital version, which you get for free when you subscribe. And you can read it on your tablets, your iPads, your smartphones as you're on the bus, heading into work or to university. And you can share it with 5 people so that they can have their own copy. Now, isn't that cool? The wonder of technology. So if you subscribe for 1 year, we will also give you a free back issue, just to kickstart you. There we go. And if you sign up for a 2-year subscription, we'll give you not only the back issue, but we'll give you 2 free DVDs. Just got to lean further forward. These are great DVDs. One's called Rapid Rocks, which looks at the millions and millions of years that we've just discussed. The other one is the documentary Fallout, which I mentioned. And it's a wonderful thing. So, my team are going to go around and hand out the clipboards again for you to subscribe to the Creation Magazine. Now, please, this time, you need to fill them out and take the piece of paper off the clipboard and then pass the clipboard along. And then once you once we're finished, just bring it over to the table, to me, and we can sort out your subscription. The other good news is on the back, you could even sign up 5 gift subscriptions so you could bless somebody else. Now, wouldn't that be a wonderful gift to receive? While the clipboard's going around, I'm just going to highlight a few of the other valuable resources that we have available on the table for you. And I know that Pastor Paul has previously mentioned that some of our resources are already in the church library. So I would really encourage you, check those out, read them, use them, because they are valuable. They're better in your hands than sitting on a dusty shelf. So I highly recommend you check those out too. All right, let's start with I'm going to walk over here. Let's start with a starter pack. Brilliant starter pack for those that want to start to get to know some of the science information. We have the Creation Answers book, which is a wonderful resource. We have Refuting Evolution, and we have a DVD called Origins in the Modern World, Why It Matters. And the great news is that this is on a special price, that you buy this, you get the Creation Answers book for free. So how good is that? We have a lot of children's packs also, and I particularly highlight this one. So these are 4 delightful books to read to and with your preschool children. These books use captivating artwork to teach about God's design, biblical history, and relationships in a way that young children can easily understand and enjoy. Then we have the Creation Answers book. Now, if you buy nothing else, highly recommend you start with this. It's got biblical answers to over 60 important questions that everyone wants to know about creation evolution in the Bible. So not only does it answer your own questions, it equips you to effectively respond to those that resist the gospel due to worldly teaching on origins. It's a must-have for everyone's library. Then we have, for those that are into theology, this is the Rolls-Royce commentary on Genesis chapters 1 to 11. It is an absolute stunning book, and it is written by a New Zealander, Jonathan Safati. Then if you're intrigued by geology, we have Biblical Geology 101, which is it's a new book, came out last year. Very easy read, but if you want to start to get into geology and how geology actually supports the Bible, this is a fantastic resource. Or Deep Time Deception, which is another one. And it answers all those questions. And then for the children, we have Exploring Geology with Mr. Hibb. Great resource. Even I know of adults that read this book and say they learned something new. So it's not just for children, but you journey through the exploration or exploring geology with the grasshopper Mr. Hibb. So I hope you can see how you can share this and how you can equip yourself with the answers. I think right now is actually an exciting time to be a Christian because we have the scientific and biblical answers to the questions that people have. And I'd like to conclude with the question that we started with today. If you can remember that far back. Are you willing to become a rescuer? To equip yourself with the answers to questions that people in our culture are asking, so that you can be the one that dives in and rescues the perishing, while perhaps others just stand by on the beach and watch. And remember, we started with 1 Peter 3:15. Be ready to give a defense. It is a command, not a suggestion. And I want to leave you with one final thought. Or 4 questions, actually. What now? What can I do? Share the gospel. Simple as that. What should I do? Share the gospel. You get the hint? What is God telling me to do? Share the gospel. All right. Last one. What am I willing to do? That, ladies and gentlemen, is the $64,000 question that only you can answer. Thank you. I'll pass over to Pastor Paul for the closing and benediction.